June 6, 1944. The English Channel. 156,000 men are crossing the most dangerous stretch of water on Earth. Behind them, years of blood and planning. Ahead, the most heavily fortified coastline in history. Steel, concrete, and the finest armored divisions the Third Reich can field. Allied commanders know the math. If German Panzer divisions reach Normandy within 48 hours, the landing force doesn't survive. Not some of it, all of it, driven back into the sea or buried in French sand. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel commands those panzers. His 15th Army, 250,000 men with armor and artillery, sits at the Pas-de-Calais, watching a different stretch of coastline entirely. Why? Because 15 miles from the white cliffs of Dover, spread across the fields and harbors of southeast England, sits what appears to be the largest invasion fleet ever assembled. Hundreds of landing craft crowd the Thames estuary. Long columns of Sherman tanks stretch across open fields. Fuel depots, ammunition dumps, and the radio signature of a full army group, 300,000 American soldiers, poised to strike. Every German reconnaissance photo confirms it. Every spy report corroborates it. Every radio intercept points to the same conclusion: the real blow is coming at Calais. Rommel holds his panzers. He waits for an invasion that will never come. What he doesn't know, what no one outside a handful of British intelligence offices and a London film studio knows, is that the entire thing is a stage set. The tanks are rubber. The landing craft are canvas over steel pipe. The army doesn't exist. And the man most responsible for building it has no military rank, no engineering degree, and absolutely no business deciding the outcome of the Second World War. His name is almost completely forgotten by history. That changes today. To understand what came next, you need to understand what Allied planners were staring at in the summer of 1943, and why every solution they proposed was quietly, methodically falling apart. Operation Overlord was the most complex military undertaking in history. 7,000 vessels, 10,000 aircraft, a ground force eventually numbering 3 million men. But raw numbers weren't the problem. The problem was deception. Allied commanders understood with painful clarity that Normandy only worked if Germany's strategic reserve stayed somewhere else. The 15th Army had to remain fixed at the Pas-de-Calais, the shortest channel crossing, the most obvious invasion route, the most heavily defended point on the Atlantic Wall. If those forces drove south to Normandy before the beachhead consolidated, the landing died on the beach. British intelligence, operating under Operation Bodyguard, had been working the problem for months. The double-cross system, a network of turned German agents feeding controlled misinformation to Berlin, was running perfectly. False radio traffic was broadcasting. Carefully planted rumors were circulating through neutral capitals. Germany was receiving exactly the picture the Allies needed them to see. But the deception chiefs faced one problem they couldn't solve with radio signals and spy reports. They could tell the Germans a massive army existed in southeast England. They couldn't show it. German aerial reconnaissance was meticulous. Their photo interpreters were experienced and skeptical. They had been burned before in North Africa and remembered it. To be believed, the fictional 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG, needed a physical presence. Tanks cameras could see, landing craft reconnaissance pilots could photograph. Fuel dumps with the thermal signature of real petroleum storage. The scale required was almost insane. Hundreds of dummy landing craft, each roughly 170 feet long. Dozens of armored formations, artillery parks, supply installations spread across 3 counties. All of it had to be convincing from 20,000 feet, survive channel weather, and be deployable within weeks. Building it with real materials was impossible. There wasn't enough time, spare hardware, or manpower. Every piece of real military equipment parked in a Kent field was a piece of equipment not crossing into Normandy. The requirement went to the conventional military engineers. They reviewed it carefully, ran the numbers, and delivered the honest verdict: it cannot be done. Not at this scale, not in this time frame, not with available resources. The deception planners stared at a problem with no solution. Then someone made a phone call to a film studio in Surrey. His name was John Turner. In the autumn of 1943, he held 0 military commissions, 0 engineering qualifications, and had never been asked to do anything more strategically significant than make a cardboard castle look convincing under studio lighting. Turner was a set construction supervisor at Shepperton Film Studios, southwest of London. 2 decades of building things that weren't real and making them appear, on camera, as though they absolutely were. Castles, warships, medieval armies. If a director needed something to look like something else, Turner's team delivered. To a British Army procurement officer, his credentials were worthless. He wasn't a structural engineer. He wasn't a materials scientist. He was a craftsman who worked with canvas, steel tubing, fiberboard, and paint, which made him exactly the right man for a problem no engineer had solved. The insight came when Turner was shown the landing craft specifications. 170 feet long, photographically convincing from altitude, deployable at scale by untrained men, capable of floating. Every engineer who had reviewed that list started with the same question: what material can hold that shape under structural load? Turner started somewhere else entirely. He asked, what does a landing craft actually look like from 20,000 feet? Not a vessel, a silhouette, a shadow, a pattern of tone and shape on a photographic plate. And a silhouette, even a very large one, didn't need to weigh 30 tons. It needed to look like it weighed 30 tons. The distinction sounds trivial. It was, in fact, the difference between a problem that was impossible and one that was merely difficult. He went back to his workshop and started sketching. The solution that emerged wasn't elegant in any conventional engineering sense. It was theatrical. It was, in the language of his actual profession, a piece of set dressing at a scale no film studio had ever attempted. But it would work. The workshop Turner commandeered at Shepperton in late 1943 became, within weeks, one of the most consequential rooms in Britain. Nobody outside its walls knew it existed. He started with the landing craft. The frame, welded steel pipe, cheap, available, light enough for 30 men to handle. Over the frame, heavy sealed canvas shaped to hold its profile in wind. Beneath it, empty oil drums arranged for buoyancy, producing the low-slung waterline a photo interpreter would expect. The first prototype took 11 days. When they floated it on a flooded field south of the studio, it looked, from any distance, disturbingly real. The waterline was right. The bow profile was right. The shadows fell correctly. Then he turned to the tanks. The dummy Sherman was almost childishly simple. An inflatable rubber and canvas shell over a collapsible metal armature, fitted with a painted barrel and stenciled unit markings. A 2-man crew with a gasoline compressor could fully inflate one in under an hour. Deflated, the whole assembly rolled into a pack 4 men could carry across open country in darkness. When Turner showed the first inflated Sherman to the Army liaison officer assigned to the project, a man who had been skeptical from the start and made no effort to conceal it, the officer walked around it twice, rapped it with his knuckles, and listened to the hollow sound it made. "Those are just cardboard tanks," he said. "No one is going to be fooled by this." Turner said nothing. He noted the date. Because he had already arranged for RAF reconnaissance aircraft to photograph that field, and had already shown those photographs to a panel of RAF photo interpreters, told only that they were looking at imagery from an unspecified continental target. Every single interpreter identified the vehicles as armored fighting vehicles of American manufacture. Not one raised a doubt. Turner filed the photo interpreter reports alongside the date he had noted. He would need them both very soon. The formal presentation to the Deception Planning Committee took place in January 1944 in a Whitehall conference room that Turner would later describe as the most uncomfortable 2 hours of his life. The room held men with a combined century of military experience and an attitude toward unconventional proposals ranging from politely skeptical to openly hostile. Turner arrived as a civilian consultant, a suit among uniforms, carrying a folder of photographs and a rolled canvas sample. He laid out the case without embellishment. Production process. Timeline. Manpower requirements. Per unit cost, which was, compared to any alternative, almost embarrassingly low. 250 dummy landing craft could be built and deployed along the Essex and Suffolk coastlines within 6 weeks. Inflatable tank formations sufficient to simulate multiple armored divisions could be positioned and maintained by existing infantry units with minimal training. He showed the reconnaissance photographs. He presented the photo interpreter results. There was a moment of silence. Then the room erupted. The objections arrived simultaneously from every direction. Too simple. Too embarrassing, the notion that Germany's professional reconnaissance service could be deceived by something that looked, from the ground, like a film set. What happened when a German agent penetrated close enough to see the tanks had no tracks? What happened when the canvas deteriorated in channel weather? What happened? This from a senior army officer who seemed personally offended when a German pilot flew low enough to observe that a 300,000-man army appeared to contain no actual men? Turner answered each objection in turn. He had prepared for most of them. For the few he hadn't, he was direct about the limits of what he knew. He didn't claim the system was perfect. He claimed it was the only system available at the required scale, at the required speed, with the resources that could actually be spared. The debate ran 90 minutes. It broke when Colonel David Strangeways, Montgomery's chief deception officer, a man his colleagues described as possessing the most dangerously inventive military mind they had encountered, put down his pen, looked at the photographs one final time, and spoke with the flat certainty of a man who had made his decision long before the meeting ended. We build them all. Every last one. The objections continued. The decision stood. Strangeways moved within days. The Worcestershire Regiment provided assembly battalions working in darkness, deploying dummy landing craft along the Orwell, the Deben, and the Thames estuary between midnight and 4 in the morning. 250 craft in position within 6 weeks, exactly as Turner had projected. The inflatable Shermans followed. Long columns across Kent and Essex, maintained by daily parties running the routines a photo interpreter would expect to see around a real armored park. Then, Turner's final touch. The detail British intelligence would later credit as the element that made the whole fiction breathe. Real soldiers were stationed alongside the dummies during the early morning hours when German reconnaissance flights were most active. Cooking fires produced smoke. Washing lines produced laundry. The random, untidy human presence that separates a real encampment from an empty field. A few counties southwest, the actual invasion force lay hidden under camouflage, moving only at night. The contrast in the imagery told exactly the story the Allies needed Germany to believe. Before we get to what happened when those dummies faced actual German reconnaissance, and the German response was not what anyone expected, hit subscribe and the bell. We cover the stories the textbooks skip. You don't want to miss what's coming. February 1944. Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft permitted occasional passage over southeast England under a deliberately relaxed Allied air response, returned to their French bases with imagery confirming every report German intelligence has been receiving for months. The analysis is unambiguous. The largest amphibious force ever assembled faces the Pas-de-Calais. German 15th Army intelligence summaries from this period, declassified after the war, describe the Fusag buildup in terms that reveal how completely the deception has succeeded. Analysts note the armor density across Kent. They note activity around what appears to be a massive Dover fuel installation, a structure built entirely from canvas, wooden scaffolding, and salvaged sewer pipe that from 20,000 feet looks like critical strategic infrastructure. Not one annotation questions whether any of it is real. By April 1944, the deception is operating at full depth. General Hans Kramer, a decorated Wehrmacht commander recently repatriated from British captivity, is driven from Wales to a southern port by MI5 officers who tell him he is passing through Kent. He observes real Allied soldiers genuinely preparing a real invasion in the wrong county. He reports personally to Rommel, and then to Hitler, what he witnessed with his own eyes, an enormous force aimed at Calais. It is the final stone in an arch that Turner's rubber tanks helped build. June 6, 1944. The Normandy landings begin at 06:30. Within hours, German commanders are screaming for armored reinforcements. The 15th Army stands ready, 250,000 men capable of driving the beachhead back into the sea. They do not move. Hitler, convinced Normandy is a feint designed to pull reserves south before the real assault at Calais, holds the 15th Army in place for 2 full weeks. Luftwaffe pilot Werner Gast, flying reconnaissance over Kent in the days after the landings, files a report noting that the Fusag fleet appears fully intact. Confirmation for German High Command that the main force has not yet sailed. What Gast is photographing are canvas shells over steel pipe, still maintained by small parties, still convincing from altitude. By the time the 15th Army is finally released, the Allied beachhead has consolidated. The breakout has begun. The window that would have made Rommel's armor decisive has closed permanently. Military historians estimate the 2-week delay saved between 50,000 and 100,000 Allied lives. General Hans Speidel, Rommel's chief of staff, would write after the war that the failure to commit the armored reserve immediately was the decisive mistake, made because the intelligence was deliberately, skillfully wrong. If this story is rewriting what you thought you knew about how the war was won, drop Phantom in the comments. The full Operation Fortitude deep dive is waiting at the end of this video. The war ended in May 1945. The soldiers came home. The debriefs were written, classified, and locked away for 50 years. When veterans of the American 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the GhostArmy, finally spoke publicly after declassification in 1996, the testimonials were quiet and consistent. One veteran, speaking to a documentary crew in 2013, said it with the economy of a man who had long ago stopped needing many words. We had fake weapons. We went to places where the real soldiers couldn't be. And because we were there, they weren't. He paused. That's all it was. In February 2022, Congress awarded the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops the Congressional Gold Medal. Many recipients were in their late 90s. Some received it posthumously. n.wikipedia.org. The principles Turner demonstrated in that Surrey workshop never left military doctrine. Tactical deception remains a core operational capability across NATO and every major Western defense establishment today. The logic of the inflatable tank, the false radio signature, the carefully constructed false picture, it runs through military planning at every level. The form has changed, the principle has not. But the most remarkable postscript is simpler than doctrine. After the war, British intelligence researchers reviewed the complete archive of Luftwaffe reconnaissance imagery from the Fusag period, hundreds of photographs taken over months by some of the most technically skilled aerial crews in the world. Not one image contains a single annotation questioning whether the armor and shipping were real. Not one. John Turner returned to Shepperton and continued making things that weren't real look as though they absolutely were. He sought no recognition. He received little. He never gave interviews about his role. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, that the difference between a thing and the appearance of a thing is not always as large as we assume. That perception, carefully managed, can hold armies in place. That the most powerful weapon is sometimes the one that cannot fire a single shot, and that the man who changes history is sometimes the one they almost didn't let in the room. Those are just cardboard tanks. He was right. That was the whole idea.